We welcome you to episode 23 of the Exit Philosophy podcast. That is Rich Griffin. You can call him Griff. I'm Scott MacArthur. If you want, you can call me Scotty Mac, and we are sitting with you approximately midday on Monday, October the 9th, which is Thanksgiving Monday in Canada. So a happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, and we thank you for listening and being committed to this podcast. And Griff, there's a lot to get to with Ross Atkins' press conference from Saturday. And as we sit here right now, we are 3 days away from the scheduled press conference that Blue Jays president and CEO Mark Shapiro will hold with the media, and we'll discuss all of that. But Blue Jays fandom is hurting today. Because we got word yesterday on Sunday, October the 8th, that one of the true presences of Blue Jays fandom, whether it's at Rogers Center, whether it's her annual multi-week trip down to spring training in Dunedin, or whether it's her evergreen presence on Twitter, Liz Holmes, whose Twitter handle Biggles14 is one that a lot of online Blue Jays fans know. Liz Holmes suddenly passed away over the weekend, and it's important to acknowledge her. It's important to acknowledge her life, and it's important to acknowledge what she meant to the Toronto Blue Jays and to so many fans. And if you know Liz, if you've met Liz, if you've followed her on Twitter, you know that there is a photo of Liz with almost every important Blue Jays player over the last couple of decades. She was always out and about. And so we are sad to hear of her passing and wish to acknowledge that.
Yeah, she was a presence even when I was back at the Star, and she didn't like a lot of the stuff that I wrote because she was such a passionate supporter of the players, especially not especially of the organization, but of the players. She loved the players, and the players returned that affection. In fact, in my 4 years with the Blue Jays PR department at spring training, if somebody was looking for a specific place where I wanted them to go, I would just say, go out until you see Liz, and then right there, like if it was to sign extra autographs or to do a TV interview or whatever. And so she was a fixture. I think every player at least had an encounter. Some had a relationship with her, and we will miss her.
Yeah, just always remember her in Dunedin. At least in the old setup. I guess it would be somewhat similar, but I haven't been down there since 2019. The clubhouse down the right field line, and you'd step out of the clubhouse, and there was that area off limits to the public, but just on the other side of the fence, maybe 50 or 60 feet up, there was that gathering place where a lot of Blue Jays diehards or just general autograph seekers would gather and wait for the players to come out of the clubhouse. And Liz was one of the people who was always at the front of the railing and always there with a smile and a hello and a head nod, and very kind. And she DM'd me a couple of times, and even publicly on Twitter, we went back and forth a couple of times, always with an encouraging word.
I think, in fact, that there were a group of fans who knew that the best place to stand to get autographs was near Liz, because players would come over and then they would swoop in and get the autographs. So, like, it wasn't just media, it wasn't just players, the fans, and it wasn't just season ticket holders that knew her in their section, but it was fans, and it was hopefully it was everybody in the organization that had the same feel and the same affection for her that she had for them.
And just encourage you, if you have an X account, I still want to call it Twitter, but if you have an X or a Twitter account, if you do a simple search like Liz, Liz, and Biggles, Biggles, there will be some very nice tributes that pop up when you hit enter on that search. And she did a lot of work in the area of mental health advocacy etc. So we acknowledge Biggles, Liz Holmes, who very sadly passed away this weekend. Let's get to it, Griff. I feel like I should probably edit in some like a dun 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 dun. Or maybe I could just do it myself like I did there.
Well, if we knew how to edit, we would edit. But I thought you knew everything about radio. You know as much as I do, which is nothing.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, I could maybe find a sound effect.
Oh, okay. You could
maybe figure out a way to save it to my computer, and maybe intersperse it in the conversation here.
Nice. I would be very impressed if that was the case.
The key word is maybe. is maybe.
All right.
And there might be.
Let's get it going without sound effects, Des.
Yeah. There might be somebody out there going, you don't have to save a sound like that to your computer. What are you, crazy? I could be totally wrong about it. General thoughts about Ross Atkins' press conference that he held on Saturday. Now, there was some criticism out there about the timing of this, which, of course, if you're listening in the United States or somewhere else in the world, this is Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. So it is a holiday long weekend. If you are listening in the United States and you don't know, the Canadian long weekend of Thanksgiving is the second weekend of October every year, and Thanksgiving falls on the Monday. So it's a Saturday, Sunday, Monday long weekend. There was some criticism of rolling Ross out there on a Saturday morning to start a long weekend. I figure you do postseason press conferences as quickly as possible. So while it was not convenient, Griff, that didn't bother me all that much. But if the aim was to have it fly under the radar, the man who sat up at the dais didn't do anything to quell the concerns of the way that the year ended and the way the year went in general, did he?
Well, just with regard to the timing, I mean, I've been in the game 51 years, and so timing around holidays means nothing to me. You play games on holidays, you play every weekend. So like when that outrage came up about it being Thanksgiving Saturday, I just scratched my head and said, so? But so that wasn't a factor. In terms of the history of his 8 years, of Ross Atkins' 8 years, usually he does it a week or even more after the end of the season. And Major League Baseball sort of suggests, just short of mandating, that you do it on an off day where there's no playoff baseball games being played, and it comes under the terms of no major announcements during the postseason unless it's really necessary and unless it's an off day. So the timing was just prior to game one of all four division series, which is fine. I mean, this wasn't a major announcement; it was a wrap up. So to me, there was no issue with the timing. Some of the TV stations were absent because nobody works on a Saturday, especially a Thanksgiving Saturday. And to our American friends, I'm sorry, the turkeys we left you aren't quite as good as the ones we ate, but God bless you.
God bless.
Yeah, God bless.
Gobble, gobble, God bless.
But so the timing was not an issue.
Let's deal with the elephant in the room then, which was the handling of the explanation of who was responsible for the decision to lift Jose Berrios and Yusei Kikuchi. And I know that there are listeners to this podcast and people out there in general who think that way too much has been made of that singular move. And I hear you. If that's your opinion, I hear you. I have been trying to express my point of view for a longer period of time about what I perceive and believe to be more general issues regarding the culture inside that organization. And for me, Griff, where I was always open to debating people before, because, we all perceive what we see and hear differently. I don't think there was a lot left to misinterpret about what went down on Saturday. That was an opportunity for Ross Atkins to take responsibility. Even if he's not 100% responsible, leaders take responsibility. Ross hired the manager. Ross hired the uniformed personnel that surrounds the manager. Ross hired the non-uniformed personnel who work in the various baseball operations departments, including analytics, and the buck stops at the leader's feet. And what we got on Saturday was something that wasn't that. I don't know exactly what it was supposed to be. I think that Ross is someone, and we're all this way to some extent, so it's not a criticism necessarily, suffers from some insecurities, but how we handle those personal insecurities is something that we can hone in on. And I think that maybe in his own mind, he might have told himself, I'm empowering John Schneider when I sit up here and I say that I have no personal hand in the decision that was made, and that John Schneider, and you can ask him next time you speak to him, you can ask him whether he feels there's any front office pressure to make a decision like that. You can ask him, which is just really bizarre because you could ask John Schneider, and that doesn't mean that John Schneider doesn't feel the freedom or feels the freedom to be able to say the truth. So yes, he can be asked, but does he have the freedom to say, or feel like he has the freedom to say the truth? I think Ross might have thought he was protecting John Schneider or empowering John Schneider. And if that was in fact what he was thinking by the way that he said what he said, he doesn't have enough self-awareness to perform in front of a media horde that had a lot of questions for him.
All right, to me, here's the question is in removing Jose Berrios when he was having one of his best stuff days of the year, pitching in his old home ballpark in Minneapolis, where he had 33 wins in that ballpark, pitching against his old team, adrenaline, increasing his average velocity on his fastball, great movement on the two-seamer on the inside corner to left-handers. He was handling everybody, and he was taken out after 3 innings, and that's the question. Why was he taken out after 3 innings? You say that your rotation is among the best, if not the best, in baseball, and yet facing a Twins rotation that also claims it's among the best in baseball, you blinked, and you took your guy out and left Sonny Gray in, already feeling in that Twins dugout that they had won that battle. They had won the rotation battle. And the next day was Chris Bassett, who had struggled earlier in the year against the Twins. You could only use the Kikuchi. You could only play the Kikuchi card one of those 2 days. So why not save it? Why not keep it in the holster while Berrios was dealing in case you need it for the Bassett game? The game 3 was going to be an elimination game anyway. Game 2 was an elimination game. Game 3 was the same thing. It was an elimination game. So do you feel like Berrios needs the help of Kikuchi in turning people around in the order, in the lineup, more than Bassett does? Do you trust Bassett more than Berrios? The way Berrios was dealing, he was the guy that day. He would have gone 6 or 7. And Ross suggests that 2 runs is a success. Giving up 2 runs, if you had told him before the game that you would give up 2 runs, you'd take it because you expect your offense to score more runs than 2. But here's the phrasing that he used that makes you wonder. Ross Atkins talking about the decision to remove Berrios after 3 innings, 3+. He walked Royce Lewis, looking out to the bullpen and seeing Kikuchi warming up, knowing that it was going to be his last hitter. Ross's quote, "Those meetings are John Schneider's meetings. It's a group of individuals that he prepares with every day. The group is the staff that's on the field. It's not the front office. I do not attend these meetings. And I certainly do not make those decisions. I found out about it when you did. That doesn't sound like someone sharing the responsibility of a decision that he had to know about. He had to know that that was going to happen. Because if he wasn't at that pregame meeting, which is plausible deniability there, then the night before, when they were discussing how are we going to handle game 2, he was in that discussion. So he knew about it.
Well, and there are people representing, for lack of a better way to describe it, the front office, a person or people in those meetings. So your people are there, and your people will report back to you. You are involved. You're not this magical floating there sometimes, not there other times entity that gets to take his hands off the steering wheel when it's inconvenient. And Griff, we know that he knew. We know that he knew. This is not an opinion. This is not we have both spoken to people who have confirmed that Ross Atkins knew. So the issue isn't about the decision anymore. It's about what he said up at that podium. And the question I posed in a minute-long video that I put on X on Saturday afternoon was, is that a boss? You watch the press conference and then personalize it for yourself. The answer can be yes or no, or you might shrug your shoulders, not care either way. Is that a boss that you, the listener right now, or you, the viewer on YouTube, is that a boss that you would like to work for? Because my issue with collaboration as a buzzword in corporate human resource speak is that when something goes right, I'm the manager, or I'm at the top, I get to pat myself on the back. All that collaboration worked out. But when it doesn't work out, then, well, it wasn't me, but it also wasn't him, and it wasn't them. So it was kind of all a little bit of everybody, but it wasn't anyone in particular enough that they need to be assigned responsibility for what went wrong. And that is the beauty, air quotes, of collaboration, is everybody just sort of gets to wipe their hands of it and point at someone else in a different direction. And that is not a healthy culture, despite what those who proliferate words like culture and collaboration would like to have you believe.
And here's a furtherance to that quote from Ross Atkins in terms of what he might feel is protecting his manager, which from off the start, it should have been a group decision, including Ross, Mark Shapiro, who were sitting together on TV shots, sitting together in the press box, even while Kikuchi was warming up. And there, in this day and age, we know that there can be communication. If he really didn't want it to happen, to the dugout, to the clubhouse, saying, hey, let's save this. Let's put this in the pocket and use the Kikuchi card tomorrow, or let Berrios continue. We know that that's a possibility that could have happened. But Ross, in describing the meeting again, he says, John is with his staff of coaches, all in uniform except one, Theron Simpson, the advanced scout. Now, if we're looking for a scapegoat, the first time in Theron Simpson's career he is being mentioned by the general manager, I think we may have found him. Is the room under that bus with John Schneider for Theron?
So, specific to John Schneider, who came under fire online enough that I would say that a reasonable amount of the fan base wanted to run John Schneider out of town. Specific to John Schneider, there are only 30 of these jobs in the world, Griff. 30 Major League Baseball managerial jobs. And we know that the role of manager has changed considerably over the last 25 years. And that change has accelerated as years have gone on. Like it really is. You are the uniformed vassal for the front office in that dugout. So I wouldn't expect John Schneider to walk in and say to Ross Atkins, "I'm out." Like, one of 30 jobs. You're in the club. You're in the fraternity. It's virtually impossible to consider giving that up. It would be a very hard decision. But I don't see how Ross Atkins and John Schneider, I should put this in a different way, John Schneider can look at Ross Atkins in the eye, look at his own boss in the eye, and believe with any shred of himself that my boss has my back when the going gets tough. Schneider did his best in the immediate aftermath of the Game 2 loss to explain it away. And by the way, shout out to John Schneider for how he handled himself a lot this year. He was the only guy, uniformed or not uniformed, in that organization who handled the Anthony Bass LGBTQ plus situation properly. He actually sounded like he cared, because I believe he does. And he did the organization proud in a period of time where the organization on a whole disgraced itself. And I thought John Schneider handled it as best as he could after Game 2, only to have the bus rolled over him by his own boss a few days later back in Toronto. I'm not trying to suggest that this is irreparable, because I don't know. I'm not in the room with those two gentlemen. But how can John Schneider, the man, have the trust and respect for Ross Atkins, his boss, the man, going forward, without some real hard, difficult, and open one-on-one dialogue where some BS gets called out by the subordinate in the situation, the subordinate being Schneider?
Scotty, we've had this discussion about John Schneider's ability to lead a team that goes to the postseason and wins. We've had it all year. But to me, and you'll recognize this part of the discussion, you don't get to be Bruce Bochy, you don't get to be Dusty Baker, you don't get to be Sparky Anderson without having been John Schneider.
Mm-hmm.
The difference these days, and both Baker and Bochy started in an era pre-analytics, or, analytics were on the way, but they weren't an everyday part of your strategy sessions. The difference is that John Schneider has this, and it's an elephant in the room in terms of that analogy, at every meeting every day. He needs to find 3 batter pockets for his left-handers. And when that arrives, as it did in the Berrios game, we bring the guy in. Now, somebody was on a trip where they felt like, Kikuchi, we need to show how smart we are. We're going to bring Kikuchi in the first opportunity, when Genesis Cabrera could have been that guy, because Kikuchi only got out of that inning and then started the next inning and was removed at an appropriate right-handed hitter time. So, like, if you're only going to use him for 4 or 5 outs, why Kikuchi? Kikuchi should have been a bulk guy. If you're going to take someone out in the 3rd inning, you better have Kikuchi pitch at least the next 3 innings, whether right-handers are coming up or not. And as we mentioned on the 22.2 session that we did.
Friday's show.
Yeah. Like, really? You want to get those 2 left-handers turned into right-handers, and that's going to make a difference in Game 2 when you have a guy like Berrios already showing that he can handle left-handed hitters in that lineup. And it's not Tony Oliva and Rod Carew that we're talking about. One of the guys was Wallner, and the other was the first baseman, I think Cirillo or whatever his name is. But come on. Anyway, we were talking about Schneider. Let's continue on.
Yeah, so, I mean, we green roomed this a little bit before we went on the record here. So I think I have a handle on where you're going to come from this. But the other thing that bothered me was that Ross Atkins took no responsibility for the Berrios-Kikuchi decision and rolled the bus over John Schneider. And yet, in a separate breath, at a different point in the press conference, he did offer some protection for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., saying, quote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Ross, I being Ross, I am responsible for finding ways to help Vlad be better. And look, that comment by itself is shrug of the shoulder. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the Blue Jays need Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to be better. And I would argue that the two things that caused this team to fall short of expectations in the regular season this year were Vladimir Guerrero Jr. underperforming his expectations or our expectations of him offensively, and Alek Manoah, certainly through the first half of the season imploding. That was neither was part of the plan here for the Blue Jays. And so why is Ross so willing to volunteer absorbing the responsibility for fixing Vlad? If there's a better phrase to use there, throw it out there. That might be a little harsh, but you know what I mean. Taking on the entirety of the responsibility for improving Vlad's offensive play next year, when if Vlad is like he was in 2023 next season, or even only slightly better, all eyes are going to be on Vlad for that. Or somebody will rail about a hitting coach or a hitting strategist. It won't come back to Ross Atkins. So I listen to words as best I can, and I drill down, and I'm detail oriented with this stuff, and I parse things out, Griff. And for me, I was just piecing things together, uncomfortable with Ross's open willingness to somehow absorb full responsibility for something full responsibility would never be attributed to Ross. Well, in a separate breath or breaths, letting the bus roll over his manager. None of it added up for me.
Well, my guess with the Vlad situation is that internally, and again, this is an educated guess, that Ross Atkins is a big supporter of Vlad Guerrero, wants to see him do well. Of course, everybody in the organization does want to see Vlad and Bo and the other homegrown players do well. But I think Ross is particularly a fan of Vlad and wants to see him succeed and wants to see him earn a huge multi-year contract like Bo is sure to earn, because Bo has pulled far ahead of Vlad Guerrero in his development. So what Ross is taking credit for in terms of helping Vlad to improve is that they are now asking him to stay in Florida all offseason instead of going home to the Dominican and sort of partying on the beach and lifting the occasional weight, although Arash says he never goes to the gym, but which caused a huge stir back in the day. But
4 or 5 years ago, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I think that Ross is taking credit for the decision to have Vlad stay in Florida, which means he'll have access to the player development complex and the facilities there every day, which will in turn help him get into maximum shape heading to spring training next year. And I think Vlad understands that 2024 might be his biggest season, because if you go into your free agent season 2025 off of a difficult year offensively in 24 and an average year in 2023, it's not going to get you where you need to be in terms of a Tatis Jr. contract, let's say. So he knows the pressure on him that this is his biggest offseason. Ross is doing everything in his power as GM to, I mean, if he needs a bus, they'll back it up off of Schneider, and then Vlad can take it wherever he wants to go.
Good analogy. I like that.
But that's the credit he's taking is for the future, not for a guarantee, but we're going to set the platform where he can succeed if he follows all of what he needs to do.
As you were talking, Griff, I was thinking about this time next year and what the talk and dialogue is going to be about. If Vladdy has a middling season or a slightly better than this year season, not overly inspiring, still kind of pedestrian by his standards, what is the dialogue going to be with Vladdy a year out from free agency at that point? I mean, it is good. There will be trade him, don't trade him debates. There will be, would he consider a short-term contract extension discussion? And there will, like, it will absolutely dominate the entire conversation around this baseball team. Dominate it.
When you're as young as Vlad is, so he'll be 26. He'll be turning 26 as a free agent. So he's still got time, as you suggest, to, if he bets on himself, which is a popular expression. Who created that? Freddie Van Vliet.
Yep.
If he bets on himself and takes a 2-year deal in 26, 27, he'll still only be 27, 28 years old going into his next contract. And that's the mega contract. You can't reach 30, but he has the advantage of reaching free agency in his mid-20s. And guys that do that, guys that are allowed to reach free agency in their mid-20s, you have to question, because more and more teams are signing their own young players before they can reach free agency, if they are really of the belief that these guys are going to be the future of our franchise. And if the Blue Jays allow Vlad to become a free agent, then that is proof that they don't have him in that category, and he needs to be in that category. So my belief is that they will try and sign him to a multi-year deal off of next year, but they're not going to sign anything this winter. So they're going to see where he is at the end of next year, and he knows it. He knows that next season is the most important of his young career, and who knows what his work ethic and what his mindset is. But maybe they just need to make it fun again in the dugout. Yeah. Maybe they just need to surround him with his Berrios buddies, but not the same group necessarily, although they're both free agents. Lourdes is a free agent, and Teoscar is a free agent. I'm not saying those guys, but they need to make it fun again. I mean, you're not having fun with Alejandro Kirk. He's not the life of the party. He has his own
quiet guy, right? He's not a bad guy, quiet guy.
He's a quiet guy. So who is, and then anyway, we'll get into this a little later, but I have some other issues in that dugout.
Okay. And to tie a bow on all of this, and Mark Shapiro is going to speak on Thursday. We understand. Nobody here is naive that the Toronto Blue Jays are a business. They are a franchise, one of 30 in Major League Baseball. This is a business. This is an enterprise that aims to maximize profit through a variety of different means. We are going to be introduced to the very latest angle on that next spring when the premium seating is completed and the final stage of the renovation of the Rogers Center is completed. And we live in a world, Griff, that has become quite heavily corporatized, and I would argue is headed even more in that direction. And we understand that the Blue Jays are but a subsidiary of a much larger multi-billion-dollar telecommunications corporation. And I would argue that whether you're selling Wi-Fi or you're selling cell phones and cell phone plans, or you are working a media division, I would argue that those subsidiaries, entities of your business are very different than a Major League Baseball team. Yes, it's a business. And yes, it is a small part. It's one of the prongs of a much larger umbrella. But professional sports remains one of the last unifiers of people. And there is a civic trust that goes with owning a professional sports team. And so if there was a CEO who performed the way that Ross Atkins did on Saturday in another wing of the business or for another business in another industry altogether, that CEO would have to presumably answer to a board of directors and would have to answer to the shareholders of that business, i.e., the people wealthy enough to begin with to invest back into that business. Here, there is an element, whether they choose to acknowledge this or not, there is an element of answering to everybody who cheers for this team and who follows this team. Now, I'm a realist who happens to be a cynic, often at the best of times, and I have absolutely no doubt that there will be 35 to 40,000 people at most of the home games next year. I have no doubt that the environment that has been created in Rogers Center through the renovations, particularly in the outfield, helps to draw people to the building. I have no doubt that, and the metrics back it up, that Looney Dog Tuesdays, where we're jamming that nitrate-packed meat down, and meat is a loose term, down our gullets, helps to draw people in. And I have no doubt that people are going to go to the games and drink those $12 to $15 beers and kick off their Friday nights before they stumble on up to King Street West after a Friday night ball game. I have no doubt that that stuff is going to continue. And so now there's a decision on Mark Shapiro's part to be made. Do I just take that all for granted because I am convinced that it's going to happen anyway? The fan base is locked in. The support for this team is guaranteed. Or do I understand that despite all of that, there is a civic trust that we hold, because professional sports is, again, a unifier, is a civic trust to some extent. Well, it is also a business. And I need to sit up there and acknowledge that we have had some trips along the way, and we need to correct the areas where our communication internally is breaking down and where the responsibility ultimately lies for decisions that are made. And when communication about responsibility needs to be made public, we need to get that right.
Well, I remember a famous baseball manager saying that if I start making decisions that the fans want me to make, I'll be sitting up there with the fans in no time. I think that further to your point, they need to report to the fan base only because they support by going to games and watching on TV and whatever else. But the ultimate decision comes down to what is this team going to look like on opening day of 2024? Is it going to fill the stadium with good baseball, with winning baseball? And that's something that Mark Shapiro has to decide if Ross Atkins can be that guy. They've talked about, and we've talked about the fact that they cannot ever rebuild now that they're putting all this money into building the luxury suites and the clubs behind home plate. They can never go into a rebuild because they have to sell those seats to corporate, to non-traditional baseball fans. It's business. And the only way that business can give those tickets away during a 81-game home season is if this team is winning, because they're giving it away to clients, they're giving it away. And we all know people who own season tickets who during the down period of the Blue Jays were not able to give their tickets away and so drifted off. So the point is that if Mark Shapiro does trust Ross Atkins to be that guy between now and the end of March 2024, then he'll hang on to him and he won't care what they say on Twitter, or he won't care the emails that he gets to his office from a lot of fans who are sort of in disbelief of what Ross Atkins is trying to do, what he did with manager John Schneider, what he's done with the offense, which was non-existent, late in the season and in the playoff. So I think that my belief is that on Thursday, that will be the first question asked of Mark Shapiro. They'll continue to ask questions about they, meaning me as part of that group, continue to ask questions about the decision to remove Berrios if Mark did know about it. So it'll be a lot of follow-ups to the Ross Atkins presser. But I think that any decision on whether Ross Atkins needs to be replaced, that decision has already been made. And I believe that he will be there moving forward, and that they'll make some moves to add players to replace Chapman, Kiermaier, Brandon Belt, and to sort of figure out the second base situation. The pitching staff, by and large, returns. They've got a deep bullpen, and it goes deeper into the minor leagues. So, Ross Atkins has not handled things well on a personal basis, but I think anyone who knows Ross knows that that's not his strength, is being empathetic and sympathetic and sort of a people person.
We took a lot of questions on X. I still hate calling it X. On Twitter. And look, they're all along the same vein here. Our buddy Dan O'Toole chimed in. How does Ross Atkins still have a job? Legit question. I'm going to group some of these together because they're all variations of the same thing. Davion, at DAYVEEEON. Have either of you ever seen a team in a position like the current Blue Jays are, and what happened to them? Does it feel like we're kind of doomed? Ron de Guzman, at Ron de Guz. With the Bass and Manoah situation and press conference Saturday, there's a lack of credibility and trust when Atkins speaks. How can this be resolved moving forward if he is retained? And Warren McKay, or Mackay, apologies for the one I got wrong there, Warren, but at Warren McKay 1. If everyone remains in their current roles, how do you repair what seems like a very fractured organization? That's the question I want to, we've sort of touched on, Griff. I have to say that I'm sympathetic and I feel for John Schneider. I really do. So I don't know if that can be repaired with Ross Atkins. If Ross Atkins is capable of recognizing within himself that there needs to be an honest conversation where he's going to maybe have to hear some things privately. I'm not talking about publicly, but privately that rankle him, that maybe sort of press on that insecure nerve that he has running up and down himself, that we're all aware of and have been for a long time. I think Ross has to have the decency to at least sit there and absorb some private internal criticism from a subordinate. And if the F word needs to be uttered a few times, it needs to be uttered a few times. I think John Schneider has that right, or should have that right. Can't embarrass him publicly. That's not how these things work. But I think he has that right at this point to have a very frank and direct conversation, if he so chooses, with his boss.
I think that this clubhouse will never be the same. I think the relationship between John Schneider and Ross Atkins will never be the same. I mean, Ross tried to put a positive spin on the Alek Manoah comeback to spring training next year by saying he's excited for next year. He's extremely motivated. Now, extremely motivated could be to shove it up Ross's ass. I mean, that's motivation, and that's probably will be his first motivation, but his second motivation is to get his career back on track. So that, that might work. It doesn't need to be the most friendly, backslapping, bro hugging atmosphere to be a winning clubhouse. The Oakland A's won 3 in a row, 72, 73, 74, and they had fist fights within their own clubhouse. Dick Williams was irascible. He was a big prick, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And they won 3. I think he wasn't there for all 3, but he won the World Series with that team, went to the World Series with the 67 Red Sox, went to the World Series, I believe, another time and was working with me in Montreal with the Expos. But you don't need a clubhouse that's full of hugs and love.
Well, and I mean, ask John Gibbons about the 86 Mets.
Yeah.
And Griff, I'm sure your late friend Gary Carter told you some stories. I mean, Kevin Mitchell, Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden,
Keith Hernandez.
Keith Hernandez. Like, that's a Wally Backman. Like, that's a scene, man. And yet they went out and they got it done.
Yeah. So basically, I feel like, you know, despite what's happened in this postseason, despite what's probably going to happen in terms of butting heads in the offseason, and I'm sure that Ross is going to learn from this, what happened, and he's going to read the kickback on his presser, and he's not going to be happy, but maybe he's mature enough to take what needs to be done for himself, take that out of the criticism, and realize that not everybody's out to get him, that people actually want to see this team succeed because, as you pointed out, professional sports is a big part of the fabric of every city. And what's the equivalent of 1967 with relationship to 1993? You know, oh, in 1993, by the way, there were no advanced scouts bringing analytics into Cito Gaston as they went on to their second straight World Series. There was none of that. But you look down in I'm off on a rant now. You look down into the Jays dugout, and there's guys not watching the game. They're watching their previous at bat on iPads, not realizing that the other team sees them looking at their last at bat. So now they're going to change it up for their next at bat. They're always one at bat, it seems, behind the opposing pitcher. That's why you see so many Blue Jays hitters taking a strike right down the middle, because they looked at the iPad and said, well, here's the pattern that I'm going to get. And it's not. And pitchers can't locate to the same place in the strike zone where they got you out last time, even if they wanted to, even if that was where they were aiming. They make mistakes. And if you're studying an iPad for your last at bat, then you're falling behind on your next at bat.
So that sounds to me, because you always come armed with constructive solutions, Griff. That's what I love and respect about you. You let me do the crazy man ranting and raving, and then you come in and you're like, actually, here are ways, because I've been in the game for a while. I didn't arrive yesterday, that this can be fixed. But that sounds to me like one of the things that you would be suggesting, which is lock in a little more to what's happening on the field at each and every moment. Although I will say this, in the defense of the iPads or the Microsoft Surfaces, got to get the brand right in the NFL at the very least. Coaches are doing that. I don't know if you noticed, I have to jump in and intersperse here, Griff, but the 49ers completed a surgical dissection of the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football last night, and the 49ers' brilliant head coach, Kyle Shanahan, is always on a tablet on the sideline there looking at the previous offensive plays. But you're suggesting lock into the game more because adjustments are going to be made regardless. Don't get married to what you saw in your previous at bat, because they're going to attack you differently in your next one.
Yeah, before I go on with some other ideas, yes, that's exactly right. And I'm not averse to the coaches having them. The hitting coaches, the 5 hitting coaches in the dugout, or the 5 coaches that feel responsible for certain players. I'm not averse to them looking at the iPads, and if they see something that's useful, come to the player and show him. Don't have them sitting on the dugout. When the Blue Jays won the 93 World Series, they had major league security people there in the end of the dugout in the camera bay. If there was a monitor pointing towards the dugout with a live picture of the game, they would make them turn it away from the dugout. That's how basic it was back in 1993 in the mid 90s. And look at us now. And look, are they winning World Series like they did in 93? No. Anyway.
Other solutions.
You've
got a list.
Yeah. I feel like we do not want to be among the villagers with torches charging towards Dr. Frankenstein's castle because he's trying to build a perfect machine out of human parts. You know, there were good parts on both sides. And we do not want to be among the villagers carrying the torches. We want to be mediators in this group. We want to help. We want to be part of the solution, not burn the whole operation to the ground, as Dr. Frankenstein was worried about. So basically, I have observed that in the final homestand that the Jays had, that when the Tampa Bay Rays were in, they had 26 out of 28 players on the field for their batting practice, for their stretch. And guys were throwing, guys were together, guys were stretching, but they were all on the field at the same time. I don't think that ever happens with the Blue Jays. The relief pitchers work out at one point. The hitters are all optional to come out on the field and hit together. My suggestion is that for an hour and a half every game in 2024, the hour and a half assigned to the Blue Jays for batting practice, home and road, that every player who's healthy comes out on the field, and whether they want to take their full number of swings or not, they are out there. They can go shag with the pitchers. Starting pitchers should be out there shagging. Relief pitchers should be out there schmoozing. But everybody should be there for an hour and a half. It creates a bit of a team chemistry. After every round of hitting in the cage during batting practice, that hitter should go to first base, and this used to be the way it is, lead off, react to the contact of the bat for the next hitter, make his way, lead off second base, don't get picked off, as we know some guys tend to do. So make your way around the bases. Each time that you finish your round of hitting, go to first base, pretend like you're in a game situation, go around the bases. And that way you're at least familiar with the feel of being on second base in a regular game. The other thing is, at the end of visitors BP, go back out with the starting lineup, do an infield, outfield, throw to the bases from the outfield, cutoffs, line up. How many times have we seen pitchers never leave the mound when a ball is in play instead of backing up a base? And very subtly, there's a guy that goes an extra base because the attention to details at spring training was 5 months earlier, 4 months earlier. Those are just some of the things that can be done that beyond spring training. Spring training fades into the netherworld of your mind as a hitter, as a runner, as a fielder, and all the drills that you tried at spring training and that you did every day, you don't remember. And so why not keep those up? It can't hurt, because you look at batting practice of the Blue Jays or any other team, it's all the same. They're swinging the bat. They're no better, no worse than any other team. But when you get into a game, they have been far worse for the ability that we know they have.
Okay, so is this some kind of high performance department component where you got guys taking BP every day? And we understand, Griff, like it literally is not 162 games where you take on-field batting practice. If you play a Saturday evening game, you're probably not taking on-the-field swings on Sunday morning before the Sunday afternoon end of weekend getaway day game. There are times where it doesn't happen. So
when your flight gets into a city at 2 or 3 in the morning and you get to the hotel at 3 or 4, no, you're not taking BP.
Right. So you allow for those sorts of things. So it's not a strict full 162. I just wonder, especially when you consider the number of games where whether it's Vladdy in particular, he's always the one that comes to mind, but there are others as well. Guys are taken off their feet. They either DH or they sit and are available as a late game pinch hitter or defensive replacement, whatever the case may be. Factoring all of that in, along with the overload of information that is provided to these players now, if that time before the game isn't being spent differently in the 2020s than it was in the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s.
Yeah, you've got 3 or 4 video positions in the clubhouse, and players are there all afternoon. Even when the media comes in, players are there and they're looking at old video of a pitcher or old video of themselves. And it's constant. So yeah, there's a load. It's a busy work day for players, but maybe it's just the hours are being misappropriated towards technology rather than the basics of the game that created 99% of the Hall of Famers today. I mean, that are in the Hall right now.
Work smarter, not harder, you say.
Correct. And yeah. So we do know, because Ross Atkins sort of, as he was ending the press conference, and we mentioned this earlier in today's exit philosophy, that he suggested that we'll miss Matt Chapman, Kevin Kiermaier, Brandon Belt, and Ryu, but that Ryu may be a possibility to come back.
Well, he kind of caught his own words a little later and suggested that they were all possibilities to come back.
Yeah, well,
and I don't believe
the first thing he said is the reality of it.
Is the truth. Yeah, Chapman's gone.
But the thing is that those are three areas that every fan knew had to be upgraded offensively. I mean, Brandon Belt had some nice moments, but when the games were on the line, he was on pace for like 250 strikeouts in a normal season if he played every day. So those are three positions that need to be addressed, as well as second base. So there's 4 out of the 9 batting order positions that need to be addressed. And to me, they'll be addressed early. They'll be addressed before Christmas, maybe the winter meetings, maybe free agent signings before, or trades before, because as we've also talked about, they need to sell those fancy new club packages and season tickets behind home plate that include membership at those clubs. And you can't wait until January or February to sign a Scott Boras client who's been out waiting the market. So Chapman's out. Besides, April was his month, and they need a Mr. October, not a Mr. April. So Kiermaier could come back in a role that would be less of a starter and more of a bench player, because you can't have Varsho and Kevin Kiermaier in the same batting order 75% of the games, because that's all the right-handers that you see, the right-handed starters that you see. You can't do that. You've proven that you don't score enough runs that way. So if Varsho moves to center field and Kiermaier becomes a fourth outfielder if he re-signs, but he would explore the free agent market first before accepting any role like that. And then you've got Brandon Belt, who's probably going to retire at this point. So you find a DH with Pop, you find one outfielder with Pop, and then you build on Bo. You hope that the next level is reached by Vlad and Varsho and some of the others, and you let her rip.
I got a name for you, Griff, who this is not exactly a free agent class that's just teeming with options.
No.
It just isn't, but I do have a name for you, and it's a quite obvious name, and it's a name whose incumbent team should be very interested in retaining him, and certainly has the financial might to do so. So the degree to which this is realistic is unclear, and it may be unlikely, but Cody Bellinger checks almost every box that you want. Cody Bellinger is an excellent outfielder. Cody Bellinger had a wonderful bounce back year for the Cubs after 2 down years with the Dodgers, which may have been tied to lingering wrist and hand injuries that he had. I mean, he found it again. And I know it's a 1-year deal with the Cubs that he found it again, but he announced his return to baseball. Oh, by the way, Cody Bellinger also plays a plus first base. So on days when Vladdy's going to DH, you're not losing a hint of pickability or defensive astuteness at first base if you bring Cody Bellinger into the infield. I think Cody Bellinger is the type of guy, a middle of the order bat, a left-handed middle of the order bat, who can play excellent defense for you in the outfield. And that, would even keep Dalton Varsho in left, because Bellinger can play center field very well. That's the sort of guy, I think, if you really want to use a pun and play on words, if you want to swing for the fences, Cody Bellinger is the type of guy, going to be a lot of interest, but he's the type of guy you got to check in on and make a hard pursuit for. You might not end up with him, but you got to be in the game for him.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Let's keep track of that over the exit philosophy. Will be a proponent for that.
Did you initially smirk because you're like, of course?
No,
of course we went to a guy who played for the Cubs.
That was my initial smirk, but my follow-up smirk was that you had mentioned him at the trade deadline, and I smirked then too.
Well, and the Cubs, of course.
The more you talk there, the more convinced I was that this would be a good idea. This would be a good idea. How old is he? 29, 30?
Yeah, like he's right in that sweet spot where he's still got a lot of.
All right, well, let's be proponents of that, and we'll be champions of that. And
he's a good ball player, Griff.
Let's do that.
He's a really good ball player, and you know what, and so we'll track it, we'll call for it, but I will also, as long as there's serious effort to get him, I won't be critical of the Blue Jays if they fall short, because I think there's going to be a lot of interest in Cody Bellinger, and I think there's an owner out there who essentially runs TD Ameritrade and has turned Wrigleyville into his own personal $1 billion per year fiefdom, who is out of excuses and needs to keep Cody on the north side of Chicago. But failing that, I do think that Cody Bellinger is a guy who would fit the Blue Jays lineup beautifully, especially when you consider that Vlad and Bo and Springer are right-handed hitters.
How about Lourdes? The Diamondbacks have a lot of outfielders. There might not be as much competition for Lourdes. And some of the Barrio would be returning.
Sure. Do you want to do the whole corner outfield?
Either or.
But do you want to?
If Bellinger re-signs somewhere else, then turn your attention.
Okay, so but then you know what you're signing up for, right? That you're going to be riding the Behemoth or the Leviathan at Wonderland on some fly balls to left field. It's going to be a bit of an adventure.
Wait a sec. He was one of the 3 finalists for the Gold Glove a few years ago.
Well, you're gonna get your rack of outfield assists. There's no question about that. He's got an absolute sling for an arm. Well, we don't need to break down Lourdes's attributes and shortcomings in the outfield. We've seen it for years. Seen them both for years.
Well, that's when you
honestly, I wouldn't be opposed.
That's when you put your 1-year signing of Kevin Kiermaier for a reduced amount in late innings defensively and take Lourdes out.
But Griff, you know, the one thing Lourdes doesn't address is that desire. Maybe need is a little too extreme, but at the very least, desire for a plus left-handed bat. I know Brandon Belt.
That's where you go for DH. That's where you look. Fill the DH with a strong left-handed bat.
Okay, so who am I looking at? Am I looking at like a Daniel Vogelbach?
We'll examine that on future.
We aiming higher?
We'll examine not Daniel Vogelbach, no, because fans are fed up enough of bad body types. We know that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we're going to
discuss that in future.
No to Vo. We're going to say no to Vo.
Next week's will be totally Mark Shapiro. Wrap up of his press briefing.
Yes to Bo and no to Vo. That's
good bumper sticker.
There you go. There you go. By the way, thanks for if you're watching on YouTube at youtube.com/exit velocity. Exit philosophy. Easy for me to say. Thank you for not pointing out the zit on my nose the size of Greenland, Griff. I appreciate that.
I hung my office door, Richard Griffin, for those on YouTube, over my head. I hung that to distract from your personal grooming problem.
We're nicknaming my zit Eric the Red. There we go. Yeah. And with that, it's probably time to wrap up. So Mark Shapiro will address the media on Thursday. Griff and I are going to be on that. So look, you know, we don't have a formal schedule laid out, but we'll certainly be, I'll be watching. Griff will be there live for the Mark Shapiro press conference. And if anything juicy happens, maybe we'll jump in with a late Thursday or Friday shorter episode. Otherwise, we'll remain on schedule for next Monday and break it all down then. So youtube.com/exit philosophy. You're listening wherever you can get your podcasts. And griffsthepitch.com continues to roll along. Griff writes multiple weekly columns, and he's got some great conversations that he held through the spring and summer with current and former Blue Jays and a lot of the Montreal Expos greats. Griffsthepitch.com for all of that.
And we will ask you to put the torches down and wait for Mark Shapiro's presser. And I thank you, Scotty, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
And one more time, may Liz Biggles Holmes rest in peace.
Amen.